Thanks for listening to the Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast. We hope that you find the conversations to be helpful and enlightening as you get to hear from those involved in the Evangelical Friends movement. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss when a new episode comes out. Now, enjoy the episode.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast. We have, Jacob and Austin. We're always here.
We're always here.
Actually, someone told me at Yearly Meeting a while back, talking about the podcast, and they said, I like the, I don't know exactly, I don't want to phrase this incorrectly, but basically they said, I really like the episodes where you guys have a guest. They weren't saying like they don't like the episodes where we do have a guest, but they were like, I like, it breeds good conversation. And I was like, yeah, I actually like the episodes where I have a guest too. Sometimes just scheduling conflicts or whatever, like we're not always able to get someone. They're like, I know. But so we do have a guest today. That's a little teaser for that.
It is a little teaser. I'm really excited about our guest today.
I am too. So you may be able to tell. I don't know what we're going to end up titling this podcast yet before we record it here. But this is a podcast that's going to talk about some political things, most likely, because our guest today, that's what we're bringing them on here with the work that they're doing at George Fox University. And so, I guess just caveat before we get into this, like. I initially I told Austin at Yearly Meeting when we were together at Yearly Meeting, I was like, I've been feeling internally for a couple weeks prior to Yearly Meeting that we should probably do an episode with a political theme, just given that it's an election year and like things heat up and ramp up in the election year. And I felt like that was a topic that maybe we should touch on, but I wasn't sure what exactly to touch on. And I was kind of like, should we, shouldn't we? I don't know. And then within the matter of like 2 weeks, so this is a while back for everybody, but when I was thinking about this and leading up to Yearly Meeting, we had the attempted assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. And then I believe it was 2 weeks later that Joe Biden announced that he was stepping out of the race and wasn't going to run anymore. That was the Sunday of Yearly Meeting that he made that announcement. And then pretty soon after that, he endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. As of recording this, I don't know if she's been officially selected as the candidate, but all signs point that she will be the candidate. And so there's just been a lot of craziness going on in the political world. And I told Austin after all those things, I was like, I think that seals the deal for me that we really need to do a political episode, just because the discourse around all these things is just very heavy and sometimes not great. And so,
yeah. And we were like, when kind of behind the scenes, when we're talking about like, what do we talk about? We also understand that there's people on both sides of the aisle, and just things like you can be a Christian, you can be a friend, and you can come to a particular issue and disagree on something. And we're not like the podcast that, takes a hard, like, we're not in a political opinion podcast either. Right. There's there's a lot of like Christian podcasters who have like, their political opinions and they share them all the time. And like, that's just not quite who we are. And so we didn't want to like make the political podcast to be around, Jacob or I's political opinion.
Sure.
Especially since in Yearly Meeting, and just Quakers and Christians in general can have a wide view of different beliefs.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I was on the fence, honestly. I was like, do we want to go there? That's not us. That's not what we do. But I mean, also, like I said, given that it's an election year and all the stuff that's happening, it would almost seem weird for us to not talk about it at all, like just be completely ignoring all the stuff that's going on culturally. And so,
because I think this is the other big part of it is that Jesus does have things to say about politics. And like, or at least Jesus's teachings, maybe this is a better way. Jesus's teachings have bearing on our political life,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And as friends, we kind of understand this, coming from our our commitment to peacemaking, right? Like Jesus is teaching about loving our neighbor and turning the other cheek and do not judge. Like all of these have political ramifications for us, like how we, and political in the big sense of like how do we live life together in an ordered way that promotes human flourishing. And so, because I think that's like the root of things. We all want human flourishing, and then we come to our, we have our opinions on how we get there, um, and so, but because Jesus's teachings isn't just like a private morality that I just do on my own sense. Like it does have social and quote unquote political um, ramifications. Not saying that Jesus is a Republican or a Democrat or, affiliated with a certain political party, because I'm sure that a lot of Jesus's teachings would rub people wrong
On both
either end of the
parties.
aisle,
Yeah.
on both parties. So then it's like, well, what do you do as a Christian, especially in America where you can vote and you have a large, you have um, a dog in the fight, so to speak, right?
Mm.
Other generations of Christians don't have the same political rights, and so they view these things a little bit differently, right? Like if you're a peasant in in the Middle Ages, your political opinions didn't really matter, right?
Mm.
So we in America have a certain kind of, you know, we have certain responsibilities, and when we come to think about like how do we vote as a Christian, right? We're not going to quite go into that
Yeah.
direction, but I know that that's in the back of a lot of our listeners' minds.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm going to bring our guest on. And just one more caveat to say we are filming this, or recording this. Well, we are filming too, but recording it a little early. And so we'll talk about some things. Obviously, I mentioned the assassination attempt and Biden dropping out and a few things. But between recording this and when we publish it, who knows? 5 other crazy things may happen. And so, just to let you know, we are recording this a bit early. And so, there's a chance that we don't talk about something that is super relevant that maybe happened last week because we're recording a little bit earlier than that. So, I'm going to bring on our guest. His name is Ron Mock, and he is the program director of the George Fox Civility Project. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when he gets on here.
Hello.
Hello, Ron. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
You're going to have better sound than I am.
I know. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It'll turn out just fine.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
yeah, it does. We just bought these because, well, actually, from the very beginning, Austin bought one, and I was kind of like you. I was like, it's not going to matter. And then I listened to myself back on the first one, and I was like, oh, I can definitely tell that he has a microphone and I don't. So I bought one.
Yeah.
But
Well, I
yeah,
don't do these that often, so I haven't got that kind of gear.
no,
Yeah.
you're all good. You're all good. Well, yeah, so let us introduce ourselves because we haven't actually met. I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe Austin's met you, but I don't think
I
so.
haven't.
But my name's Jacob, and I live in Idaho, Boise area, and I was a youth pastor at a friend's church out here for a long time, and now I work with youth at a national program called Caleo Academy.
Mhm.
And then Austin can introduce himself.
Which Friends
Yeah.
church?
Meridian Friends Church.
And I'm Austin. I'm the pastor here at South Salem Friends down in the Salem area.
Yeah.
It's pretty self-explanatory, but I did live in Newberg for a while and was a part of Second Street up there, and never had the pleasure to meet you at some point.
I guess not. Yeah.
So even so, our worlds probably overlapped a lot more at some point, but never had the opportunity to meet you. But yeah, I know that we heard about the Civility Project recently at yearly meeting, and
Mhm.
as we were kind of thinking about kind of like topics to talk about, I think that our civil discourse and the political climate is kind of
Yeah.
a really big deal right now. I mean, it's been a deal for a minute. I mean, the increase of polarization and demonization has been going through the roof, but especially with the recent assassination and kind of the rise of political violence that I've seen in the last few years just makes it even more, I think, important. And so we heard about your project, and we wanted to have you on the show.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. We were together, and I told Austin, like, after they gave the report at the business session about the Civility Project, I just like found Austin afterwards, and I was like, I'm gonna reach out to the guy who's in charge of that, because that sounds like exactly the type of work that we need to be highlighting.
Yeah.
So could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about the Civility Project and the background of it and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Ron Monk. My title right now is Professor Emeritus of Politics and Peace Studies. I've been at George Fox in the faculty role for 39 years now. I was a George Fox undergrad, graduating in 77. After that, I got a master's degree and then my law degree, and I started practicing law. But almost right away, at the same time I was starting practicing law, I got introduced to the concept of mediation, particularly community or voluntary mediation. The group I was with in Michigan at that time, in the Detroit area, was called the Christian Conciliation Service of Southeast Michigan, which I helped get started. And it seemed to me that this was a more useful tool for most people in many situations where they might consider going into litigation and suing somebody. The First Corinthians is pretty clear that that's not what we should do if we can. So I helped start that Christian Conciliation Service and worked with it for a couple of years. And then in 1985, moved back to Oregon, and they had just started here at George Fox, the Center for Peace Learning. So they asked me to be on that staff for halftime to help develop sort of interpersonal conflict resolution work. Eventually, I ran the Center for Peace Learning for several years, and then to about 2003, and then mostly taught sort of as a general faculty member here at George Fox in politics and peace studies and conflict resolution, a little bit of business law, that kind of stuff. And so that's the background. In 2020, we had the COVID scare. It was, as a scare, there was a lot of reasons to be scared, but the university was particularly frightened. Frightened, that's probably not the word. Nervous about the incoming freshman class that fall, because there were a lot of families who were saying, man, we'll just skip for a year, take a gap year.
Yeah.
Let this thing pass. And signs were particularly troubling in early June. And so they decided here that they needed to let go of some people. Among the faculty, they had drops everywhere, but among the faculty, they focused on the non-tenured people. And I'd never sought tenure in the 35 years I'd been here at that point. And so I was on the list. I was the most senior one they let go. The package they gave us was a week's pay for every year we'd been here. Well, I'd been here for 35 years. So they were basically almost paying a 10-month contract for me already.
Yeah.
To do anything. So partway through the summer, that started on July 1st. And I think late in July, I went and saw President Robin Baker of the university, and said, yeah, you're paying me to do almost a year's work and I'm not doing anything. Doesn't make any sense. Is there some way around this? And it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. That once they've laid you off, they're in a bad spot to hire you back on. So I had to, if we're going to do anything, it would have to be as a contractor at first. And Robin was concerned, had developed a growing concern. The climate in the national politics had gotten worse. And then the yearly meeting here had gone through the difficult split of 2017. And the university found itself sitting right astride several different polarizing chasms, you might say. I think the one that actually was sort of the last straw was the yearly meeting one for Robin. And so he asked me if I would be willing to start a civility project, just to work on kind of holding things together, helping people find ways to work better together. So we started that actually officially in November of 2020. That's how that got started.
And so what kind of like work do you guys do? I mean, like the Civility Project, he gave us a brief overview of what that is during his report. And I've looked at your website, you know, like the Civility Project vision: help people recognize disagreements and the political cultures we use to resolve them as a part of God's loving providence, promote vision for stewardship of political culture, nurturing civility where we can, offer resources to support those working to build civility and heal political culture. So I guess like a few questions when I read that is like, I mean, help people recognize disagreements. That seems like people don't need any help recognizing disagreements. But
well, just a minute.
yeah, sure.
The idea here is that we tend to think of disagreements as bad things or inconvenient things, and yeah, obviously sometimes they are inconvenient or even bad. But and this was not an idea I had when I started this work. It's actually one that's come to me in the last year or so, year and a half probably. Is the idea that you look at how humans are created, and we're designed to be born unique, or nearly so in the case of identical twins, and uh, and so that we're already born different from everybody else. And then as we accumulate life experiences, we get some commonalities that grow, but we also each get a unique perspective. And I don't think this is an accident. I think this is on purpose. I think it's part of God's design. I can make the same argument to an evolutionist that this is how we evolved and this is part of our success. Either way, it works about the same. We are designed to disagree. And if you think about how humans have learned to better adapt to things and overcome problems and so forth, every single modification in what we do, it starts with a disagreement. It's maybe as simple as loading the dishwasher. This is a thing in our house. My wife toss the dishes in and we have a disagreement because I think they should be neatly organized and all efficient and everything. But, my dishwashing techniques, and if my wife were listening to me, her dishwashing techniques would both improve from our disagreement. She gets it done faster. I get it done better. And so there's something we can each learn from each other. If I just said, no, you listen to me, or she says, no, you listen to me, we're done. If we think unity requires unanimity, we are putting ourselves into a very bad spot. Groups that insist on unanimity typically fail, and sometimes fail tragically. The disagreement within the group is crucial, and the disagreement between groups is crucial. We are designed for it. It's part of God's plan for us. So what I'm trying to do now, part of what we try to do in our education work, both on campus and in the community, is to help people think about disagreement as a resource, as something to be thankful for. I don't live up to this always myself. My wife made me a T-shirt that says "Disagreement is a gift," and I was wearing it one day, and I had a conversation on the phone with one of our kids. We have 4 kids, and there was a point at which I was disagreeing with one of the kids, and we hung up amicably, but I was still a little bit ticked at my son. And Melanie says, "What's that shirt say you're wearing?" So I don't always remember myself, but the idea is that we should be thankful for it. And it's as a piece of providence, like any other piece of providence, like the environment, like the resources we're given, the skills we're given. We're supposed to be good stewards of it. And so we're trying to help people think about disagreement as something to be a steward of, not something to suppress or cure.
That's a really,
yeah,
I was gonna say that's a really good point. As a person who is generally super conflict averse, like I'm not a person who loves to stir up conflict or have disagreements, and oftentimes I'll just like suppress my own, just like I'm just gonna swallow my opinion because or like I'll just do what you say, and maybe be a little bit like, because I just generally don't like conflict, and it's a really interesting perspective to see that conflicts aren't like always a bad thing.
No. Now, yeah, this is like any other thing. We need to steward it. This doesn't mean we should run rampant with it. So I'm not encouraging you to go out and have an argument with everybody you see today. But I think really I'd mostly like us to think about the disagreements we encounter from others. I'm not trying to give everybody a free pass to get it out of the people's faces, although occasionally that has to happen. That's a prophetic role that could happen. But when the disagreements come to me, when they come to us, it's easy to just treat them as an annoyance or something. But I think the better, more civil response is to explore what the disagreement's about. See if I can understand the other person well enough to make their argument for them if I needed to. I have a mug here. It's one I got from a group called Flipside. They offer a daily newsletter about something about the news, and they offer a left and a right opinion, and they're trying to show both sides. And this one is a modification of a quote from John Stuart Mills. The original quote says, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." Basically, you have to understand the other side's case, your own, which is something they teach in law school. If you're going to serve your client, you should be able to make the other side's argument as well as they do, so you can figure out how to make your client's argument. But the same thing applies here. If somebody comes to us with a disagreement, we ought to figure out what's behind the disagreement, even if we're sure that what they're advocating is wrong. Why are they advocating it? What's driving it? And see if we can't learn something from it. And I think that's a better way to be a steward of the disagreement.
Yeah. Do you find that a lot of people's disagreements is because they just don't know people that have, or they don't interact with people that are of that side or that thought process? Like an example that I think of when I think about this is like I shared, I was on staff at a church for a number of years, and they had what they lovingly called an old man's breakfast. That's what they called it. That's the name they gave it. But it was, like
call themselves the
yes,
old man.
yes, it was the old man's breakfast. It's a bunch of old retired guys, and they'd get together every Tuesday for breakfast at a cafe. And so when I was on staff at the church, I would go to that. It started off as kind of like I guess I should go to that, like I am here. But I really very quickly found myself loving it and wanting to go to it. But I was like, I don't fit the description. I'm not an old man, that kind of stuff. But they wanted me to come. But because generationally and for lots of different reasons, but there was a few guys there that like I just didn't share a lot of similarities with when it came to views on certain topics and whatever. And they would always, if something happened in the news, like for sure, they're going to talk about it the next Tuesday morning and bring it up and all this kind of stuff. And like Austin said, I'm not really one for conflict. If you know Enneagram stuff or do Enneagram stuff, I'm 9. I'm the peacemaker. Like I know what topics are controversial, and I am never going to bring them up willingly on my own. And so that doesn't mean I don't have my opinions on them, but I would rather talk about something else that's going to be not confrontational. And so I found myself through that group, like I say this and I don't know how else to say it, but going because I had to. I was on staff, but I don't really mean that I had to or things like that. I really enjoyed it. But I was rubbing shoulders with people who did not think like I did on a regular weekly basis and getting to know them for more than just their, like soapbox issues. Like, of course, they would bring those up every now and then, but I'd also get to hear about their grandchildren, and I'd get to hear about the vacation they just took last week, and I'd get to hear about, all this kind of stuff. And so, like, yes, on paper, we maybe would not agree on certain societal, like, hot button issues or things like that, but I knew them as a person and got to enjoy them. And I think in our world today, like, there's just not a lot of that. Like you mentioned earlier, people are quick to cut people off and just be like, I don't like them because they said this, and I'm never going to hang out with them again. And so, yeah, I don't know, like, how we can get people to think beyond that and like force themselves to hang out with people who think differently than them, but I think we would all benefit from that.
You're talking you're talking about a phenomenon I think we've always had. There's a tendency for people to prefer to hang out with people they agree with. It's just easier. It's more pleasant in most ways. Things go smoothly. So I don't know how, as technology has advanced and mobility has advanced, we find it easier. We should find it, you would think, easier to get outside that little circle, the bubble, you might call it, of people who have the same experiences and or agree on the same things. And maybe for a while it was. I don't want to bore you with a lot of political science, but that one of the things I've noticed was when I was in grad school, the works we were reading when I was in the 70s in grad school were mostly written in the 50s and 60s, and the political scientists were concerned because the American political parties weren't enough different, and so it was hard. They said it was hard for the people to make a change, because if they didn't like the Democrats, they'd elect the Republicans. The policies might not change all that much. There were differences, but they overlap so much. And so they were hoping that they were generally thinking the thing needs to happen is parties need to be more different. Well, guess what? They got more different. Starting maybe all the way back to the 60s, depending on what you read. When Senator Hatfield from Oregon retired in 1996, he complained that for the previous, say, 15 years or so, the life in the Senate had changed and people didn't work across party lines as much and everything was more polarized. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd never noticed it. I thought, gosh, why is he complaining about this? But it wasn't much long after that it was all showing up all the way across the board. And he was on to something. Things were changing. And now we do have what the old political scientists would call responsible political parties, in the sense that they are different from each other. But they are so different now that they hardly ever work bipartisan. It's news if they're bipartisan. So, like the inquiry into the attempted assassination has been pushed by both parties, and that's rare. I mean, that takes a rather vivid event to make it happen. So it turns out that there are forces in modern life that are pushing us apart, making it easier for us to stay apart, I should say, to construct bubbles and stay in them. Some of that most of that's probably technological, having to do with social media and so forth, and the programs there, the apps and the whatever the services there that have an incentive to figure out what you want and give you more of it. And also have an incentive to make you angry or fearful, because you are more likely to act on those than anything else. Even humor doesn't have the same attractive power as things that are making you angry or fearful. And so it's easier now rather than harder. Even though we're more mobile and we have more connections, it's easier now to construct a bubble that you can stay in and almost never stick your nose out of people who agree with you. And that's why we now have, and it's become so powerful. And now people in their different bubbles, when they look out at the world, they're seeing largely entirely different worlds. They're not agreeing on the facts in the world. They're not agreeing on what vaccines do. They're not agreeing on various conspiracy theories of left or right. They just can't see the same reality. So this is very dangerous for us. And so when you were hanging out with the old man's lunch, breakfast, you were getting outside your bubble, and in a way, you were helping them be a little bit outside their bubble. And so this is one of the things I've taken to really promoting, is finding ways to hanging out with people you don't agree with, or outside your bubble.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it's not even that I disagreed with them all on everything, but they have way different life experience than me. Obviously, they've lived a lot more life than I have, but a lot of them were in a war of some sort. I've never been in the military. A lot of them have lived through like recessions and done all this kind of stuff. Yeah, so it's just like their life experience is way different than mine.
Yeah, and I don't begrudge them their group of friends, but I'm glad they had some contact.
Yeah,
A different point of view. And it seems to me that it wouldn't take that much of a throwing of a switch for us to find those contacts pleasurable. To say, oh, somebody's different than me. This is interesting. Let's see what I can find out about things from this person. Obviously I might also like them to hear from me, but sort of a similar thing, trivial maybe. This last year, Melanie and I, my wife and I, had two exchange students living with us, one from Indonesia and one from Turkey. They're both Muslim young ladies, and very nice. We had a great time with them. The one from Turkey had been on Hajj, which means she'd gone to Mecca with her parents when she was, I think, a young teenager. And they It's a lot of people there, very crowded. It's hard to find food. And they were struggling with the local cuisine, even though it's, Saudi Arabia is not that far from Turkey. Finally decided they would get some good old stuff they could get at home. So they went to a Kentucky Fried Chicken, which kind of bothered me. It seems like there should be more diversity in the world. Shouldn't we be treasuring the different cuisines and all that kind of stuff? But they went to go get American food, like home. I just found that a little tragic. And I'd like, so I'm trying to develop some taste for difference. But one time a friend of mine, maybe Ralph Beebe, I guess maybe one of you might know who Ralph Beebe is. He was a longtime professor. He was one of my mentors when I was a student. He called me up one day and said I should run for state legislature. And I said, Ralph, I go to church late, so I don't have to talk to people in the greeting hour. I don't think I'll make much of a politician so it's hard for me to push myself out there and meet people. So I understand the difficulty.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to kind of touch base on something that you said earlier about the role of technology.
Yep.
And how it's kind of fueling some of this sort of stuff. And I remember back in 2016, I remember just getting more and more heated just in my own personal life, because if we all remember the election of 2016, it was very heated. And I remember I was very much on social media, and I remember I made some posts, and it just was like, it was just consuming my thoughts. And I was feeling angry like a lot of the time. And I remember the season of Lent came, and I was like, I'm going to do a fast from social media as just to kind of, I remember I was just getting angry at people, like loved ones of mine, friends, family members. And so then I was like, I'm just going to like deactivate my account for 40 days. And it was extraordinary, the change that I experienced in my affection towards people who I was just currently super angry with previously, because I knew that if I was like going to spend any time with them in real life, the things that would brought up wouldn't be brought up.
Yeah.
Like we just wouldn't be caring about these sorts of things. And
you wouldn't be building a relationship around them for sure. You'd have other things going on.
We have other things going on, and they're much more like multidimensional people rather than a collection of opinions that you put on a social media page. And it was a really transforming experience for me, so much so that afterwards I like closed out all of my accounts, and to this day like don't have them. Like I don't use personal accounts. I guess I do have some social media like YouTube, but I don't ever go into the comment section. So but anyway, I have found that the algorithms that we have that are kind of the invisible hand of our of our social environments now, like really do push us to be angrier at one another, like constantly by promoting that material, because the thing is like that's how they get paid, right? Eyes on the page. And how it is really interesting how if you spend time with people, if you step back and spend time with people, in person, how a lot of those things kind of just like fall away. Not that like you won't have like real disagreements, but because like, but they're different.
Yeah. Well, I have I mean, this kind of goes along with that, and then I can segue it into a question for you, Ron. But like thinking about that, so Austin says he doesn't have any social media, so I don't know if he's seen any of this, but more recently, like, and I don't know if either of you are watching the Olympics or we're watching the Olympics, but I am not a sports person, but when the Olympics come around, I like to watch the Olympics. I don't know what it is, but anyway, so the opening ceremonies, I actually didn't watch the opening ceremonies live because I was doing something. And so I went back and watched it pre-recorded later. And
I found it tedious. We tried to watch it.
Yeah, I fast forwarded through all the countries coming in on boats. I was just trying to watch
the part I like to watch. But
well, so Austin, I don't know if you've known this, if you've seen, because if you're off social media, but recently there's been a lot of controversy around a part in the opening ceremonies where people were saying that they were mocking the Last Supper scene and they were having members of the LGBTQ community portray that. Well, then the director of the show has recently come out and say, that's actually not what I was going for. You know, he's kind of like, I can see how you thought that, but that's not my intention. So, but a lot of people have taken that and they're sharing some things and sharing images of it. I've seen it a lot on Facebook, like, you
Yeah.
know, people saying how we can't support the Olympics because they did this, even though the guy has come out and said that's not what I was doing. But so I've seen a lot of people share that and post sentiments like that online, but up until as of right now, at the point of this recording, I have not had a single person bring up the Olympics to me in real life. And so
Olympics
what
in general, or just the
well,
opening?
I mean, they've brought up a few things like the gold, but they haven't brought up the opening ceremonies or that specific thing in real life. And so my question is like, what drives someone to share something like that or make a comment on something like that on social media, but they don't bring it up in real life?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I didn't know you were going there.
Because
I
like I've
don't.
seen so much of it online, but in real life, I have yet to hear a single person mention it, either
Yeah.
pro or negative. I have just not heard anyone mention it at all.
Yeah. Um, well, the general impression I get is, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how this all works, but that social media um, doesn't give us the verbal cues, the nonverbal cues that we get in other places. And it's just sort of one channel in communication, maybe with a few, a few implications, but so, and also it feels anonymous, even though you might have your name attached to it. It just feels like you're not right there, or impersonal at least. So we are less restrained. And actually, this I find that in an odd way kind of hopeful that we have something built into us, whether it's instinctive or cultural, I don't know, and I probably don't care. Uh, that that will usually restrain us, give us help us use some restraint, um, maybe directly out of thoughtfulness for the other person, or at least indirectly because we don't want to be thought of badly by the other person. That we pick up it in interpersonal contact, even likely more on Zoom like this than with just writing, although probably even richer if we were actually in person.
Mm.
And so people are less restrained. And also they tend to post and then they can walk away. And so they don't necessarily see the blowback directly, get the feedback directly to them. Whereas if I say something to you and you start to get angry, I'll probably be able to detect it. Even I will probably be able to detect it.
Yeah, if we
And
were in person.
and that gives me a negative feedback and probably helps me restrain what I do next. On the other hand, I suppose, I mean, one of the things about social media is it's also safer in a way. If you get very mad at me, you're gonna have to work very hard to actually hurt me physically. I mean, you'll have to drive all the way to Oregon. And whereas if we're in the same room and you have an impulse of violence, that you could inflict it on me pretty quickly, considering how young you are. And and so it's so there's a little, that's another reason for a lot less restraint.
Hmm.
And then of course there's the people who just, that's what they do with their day. They
Yeah.
get there and they interact and they're getting, I don't know, some kind of stimulus, or what's the word I'm looking for? Um, the hormone that you get when you're provoked. You get this kind of response, and then you want to dive in there, and
Do it
it's
again.
easy to think you're more articulate than you really are, owning the libs, or you're owning the snowflakes or whatever. When you're probably not doing that great after all. And so it just, there's less consequence for bad behavior,
Mm.
less immediate consequence. And so why do we get road rage? People who might never get angry otherwise will yell at other drivers because it's the same kind of thing. We're insulated from the other person, and it's a fleeting engagement, and the costs are reduced, or they don't come back to haunt us like they do if we're in person. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why my wife tends to pay a lot of attention to social media. I don't. It might be because I'm making a better choice. It might be just because I don't have the taste of it that she does. And she will get herself very worked up. And I say, get off the social media. But she kind of feels I think in her case, it kind of feels as part of her ministry as a believer to get out there and try to mix in with the people who are angriest and suffering the most. And I don't know.
Yeah, I found that interesting recently. I'm not the type of person that ever posts anything controversial or anything like that on social media, but yeah, I just noticed it recently. I think with the Olympics thing, I
Yeah.
probably noticed that before, but I mean, like I said, I watched the opening ceremony, and I was busy out of town that weekend, and so it wasn't even for a few days later that I finally got online, and I was like, oh, people were actually upset about this. I didn't, like, because I didn't make that connection when I watched it, and so I was like, oh, so being off of it for 2 days that weekend, I was oblivious to the blowback of it, and then yeah, I was just like, I just don't understand. One, it's not my personality to post something like that, but two, I'm just like, yeah. Um, I don't know. So yeah, it's interesting. But I guess good to hear you. On one hand, good to hear you say that when people are in person, they have some kind of psychological or biological restraint. But
See, I said I'm not a
as we
psychologist. This is just
right, sure,
folk psychology. You probably ought to talk to a real
there you
psychologist.
go. But on the other hand, if people are spending less time together in person, then yeah, we got to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah. And it seems to me that the even the media that we have, social media and Zoom like this, could be used for good in this too. But we're still learning as a culture how to deal with it, and it may be that we don't blow ourselves apart. We'll learn how to do it. So yeah. I think you got interrupted there a little bit ago. Did you want to say something about that?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I
I'm
don't.
pointing at you, but you can't tell.
You're pointing at the other direction, so I'm like,
yeah.
On my screen, you're below me into the
Okay. All right.
So no, well, I was gonna. I have heard about the controversy.
Yes.
But I like it. But like Jacob, it's not come up in my day-to-day life. It's not. And I think that's one of the things that I think is so interesting in this current cultural moment is that a lot of the outrage that we have feels like it's not actually connected to our day-to-day life, but yet we have such high emotional stakes in certain things. It's something that I've noticed is that a lot of the things that are, really impactful in our lives, like aren't really the things that we think about or talk about. It's not the controversies or the disagreements that make a huge impact. Like I was thinking about how the biggest kind of controversy or disagreement that I've personally experienced recently is in my local school board around funding. So there was a big shortfall. And so in our community, we had to decide, like, how are we going to make up this shortfall? Do we close the schools? Do we fire teachers? Do we close programs? How do we get to, the dollar amount so that we can still move forward? And I think that what was really helpful about this whole thing was it felt important. And at least in my community, I thought we did I mean, speaking for other people, I don't know how other people felt. But in that there was a way that the disagreements felt productive.
It can be, yes. And that's what you want is disagreements that are productive. I think I only sampled a small fraction, teensy fraction of the controversy about the display at the Olympics, which I also when I first saw it, I hadn't read anything about it. And I thought, why are they doing that? Is that some kind of play on the Last Supper? But I think even the little bit I read, there was material in there that was useful. One commentator was talking about what's the matter with showing different kinds of people. Well, I guess there's nothing wrong with showing different kinds of people. But that's what they were thinking about. Later on, the Catholic Church in France said, "This is terrible. This is a mockery." So that let me say, "Well, I'm not the only person that interpreted it as somehow a play on the Last Supper." Then came out the stuff about it being supposed to be about Dionysius. Well, which when I read the parts it seems like those people had maybe not anticipated that folks who are Christians would immediately tie it to the Lord's Supper, which had a similar kind of layout to what they were trying to do. So, I mean, I guess I got out of that. Okay, here's some people, they were trying to do this other thing. I don't actually think that other thing was very great, but I mean, in part, it's Dionysius. I don't know why they
Sure.
want to elevate him as a god, but anyway, and but they were trying to do something about inclusivity, and I understand the inclusivity argument, and I agree with most of it. And so, why not? I understand that. But then maybe somebody there should have said, "Wait a second, can we do this in a way that won't offend folks?" I think it probably could have been done away with offend folks, but my guess is, this is my theory, they never actually consulted anybody who was a devout believer to say, what's your reaction going to be? Are we going to interfere with our own message by creating this other unintended message? So people, I mean, to me, I learned a couple things just in, 10 minutes of reading this stuff about why somebody might think it was okay. I need to think about that idea and see what I do with it. I need to treat it respectfully. And then how this could have happened, well, I have a hypothesis that whoever was involved in creating the display didn't run it past enough people to get the full range of reactions they were going to get. And I'm assuming they didn't want to enrage anybody. I don't know why you'd want to enrage anybody for an Olympics. And so that they stepped in it without, and they didn't need to, perhaps. Which is a lesson to me, right? That I want to learn that if I'm putting something out there, I need to be careful about the unintended aspects of my message that people will pick up. They can't undo my message. They can't fix my message. It's up to me to try to make sure my message actually communicates what I want it to. And that means I probably should get people who are outside my bubble to look at something. That would be the kind of civility tending thing we should do. One of the things I've tried to talk about is that there are different aspects of civility, and one that we don't talk about much is our responsibility to tend to what I call the political culture, but how we discuss things and how we decide things. That includes politics in the world, but also at home, in our business, in our church. How do we go about doing this, and are we doing it in a way that makes us better at it rather than worse at it? And so if I were to demonstrate, if I was on that project and I said, wait, before we put this out there and agree on it, why don't we run this past a few groups that we're not sure how they're going to feel about it? And we could go through that, and they could do something to make it clearer that it wasn't trying to be a parody of the Last Supper or whatever. And the whole thing would have been more successful. If we could develop that as a habit, if I can find ways to help improve my own habits and help my group around me to prove the habit of sort of running things past people who are different than us and getting their reaction, or listening to them. So we're making sure we're understanding where they're coming from. That's the kind of tending of our culture of disagreement, I should say, or our political culture is what I'm tempted to say. That would be good stewardship. So if I have a candidate out there who I like his positions, but he's being unfair to his opponent and saying things that aren't quite true about the opponent, or skewing everything to make it worse, always showing unfavorable pictures of his opponent. We had a controversy here a few years back where somebody caught Senator Merkel, one of our senators, in a picture where his mouth was full of a hot dog. It did not look good. Looked like he was chewing his mouth open. And they used that in public. Why would you do that? It's not a legitimate argument that he sometimes has hot dogs hanging out of his mouth. So it's my job as the supporter of the person making fun of Senator Merkel, whether I like Senator Merkel or not, but that it's up to me to go to the person who's making fun of him and say, no, I don't like that. You probably are aware from South Salem of the controversies Newberg has had in our school district. I don't know. We made national and even international news a few years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this last election, there was a group who put together a little bit of money to help support candidates. And they said that the candidates we're going to support are ones who are going to act civilly. And we have a civility pledge we've developed here locally. They read that pledge to them and said, this is what we're going to look for. And one of their candidates that they were supporting kind of veered outside that at one point, attacking his opponent. And they called him in and said, that's not what we're here for. you do that again, and we're going to take our money back, and we're going to make it known that we're not going to take our money back. We're not going to give any more, and we're going to make it known that we're not giving you any more. So that's the kind of thing that has to happen for us to hold our own side, basically accountable for our actions, not just complain about the other side, because you're not sacrificing anything doing that, but holding our own side accountable for things that undermine our ability to work together in the future.
Yeah, I think that's one thing for me as we look forward to this upcoming election, and even I guess we can't do anything about elections in the past, but knowing our history of elections in the past is, yeah, it seems there's just a lot of name calling and pointing out things that, don't matter in the grand scheme of
That
things. If
might not be
someone
true.
eats a hot dog or whatever, it's like, how does that affect their stance on governing certain things? And so, yeah, I think for me, like, especially coming at it from a Christian perspective, like, I think those are the kind of things that I think we need to try to help call people out on and not take part in ourselves. Like, I mean, I guess I'll just use this example since he's not even running anymore, but, like, Donald Trump really likes to do the name calling, and he really liked to call Joe Biden Sleepy Joe and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, why do we need to do the name calling? Like, I don't understand. And um, I guess just like calling people out on that when they use those names as well. Like, can we just refer to him as his name, Joe Biden? Like, do we really need to call him Sleepy Joe and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
So I know it's maybe easier said than done when you're in the moment with someone, especially if it's someone that you don't know that well, and you just met them for the first time, or you barely know them, and they're making comments like that left and right. It can be harder to stand up to them and be like, we don't really need to do that right now. Like, you can disagree with Joe Biden politically without name calling.
Well, in my view, it shouldn't be any more acceptable to make denigrating jokes about political opponents than it is about somebody based on race or gender or religion. They're still denigrations.
Yeah.
And the ability for us to work with people we disagree with in politics is crucial. Otherwise, all the elections are winner take all. And actually, that was the feel here in Newberg, the election that happened in 21, which changed the tenor of our school board. The people who took over said that they had been ignored by the previous school board, which I was a member of. So that was an accusation against me. I felt like it was a little bit unfair, but there was something to it. Some of the members of that board have been pretty careful to try to keep the board with a particular point of view. I mean, they encourage people to run and then resign rather than resign before they ran, so that the board could appoint their successors. I got appointed that way myself, although I didn't know what was going on at that time. So that's bad, because then it really does look to people that disagree like it's being managed so that they never get a voice.
Yeah.
And so the new board that came in 21, they just copied the practice. They basically ignored the minority that they had left. Eventually, those people all resigned, which was unfortunate. So the board was entirely that group, and so they said, yeah, we got 52% of the vote, which is about what they got, and so we're going to run everything the way those 52% apparently wanted. That left out the 48%. So the last time that same group I told you about and some others were trying to get away from this winner take all mode, and to say, when you get elected, you're there to represent everybody, including the people who disagree with you. And they have as much right to be heard as anybody else, and you ought to be listening to them. That was some of the message we're trying to get. I don't know exactly how we've succeeded on that. It's hard to say. There is a different majority now. One of the things that a local group I'm working with, which is called United as Neighbors, that what they did for that election last year for the school board election, we had 5 seats open because of some of the appointments. And there were 2 people running for each seat, and they were kind of running as opposite slates. They were clearly allies with each other. We invited all 10 of them to a little informal get-together a week or so before a candidates forum, just to spend some time together. They weren't going to be allowed to talk politics. They were just going to get to know each other and so forth. We only had 3 or 4 of our people there so that we wouldn't outnumber them. I didn't go because I was a former school board member, and I would somehow, who knows what effect that would have had. So I wasn't there, but what I hear report was it went really well. They had nice conversations, friendly conversations, and it felt like the tenor of that election was different than the tenor of the one before. And so we think we had an effect. So we've done it again this spring for candidates for a county commission. We're going to try to do it again in the fall for some of the local city candidates, to just put them in a position where they have to interact with each other, as invited to interact with each other, just as individuals, with the politics leached out as much as possible, and just as people. And that's, again, I call it sort of tending to the soil of the community, trying to build connections that can help resist the tendency to polarize and dehumanize each other.
Mm-hmm.
And because I guess the notion is you're less likely to do that to somebody that you know. Although some of our families, or maybe even our churches, maybe don't give us much hope. But anyway, that's the idea, to try to do that.
Yeah.
So that's another way we're trying to promote those kind of connections.
I've had the same kind of thought of like, if we could just spend time with each other
Yes.
and enjoy each other,
Yes.
we would probably just like cool the temperature down just a bit.
Yes.
Like I was thinking, like this was like a while back. I had this thought of like, I wonder if you could just get like Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi and the other like heads of the political parties at the time, and just go do something fun. Like they all just went sledding, or like
okay.
like I mean they probably wouldn't be enjoying sledding, but like if they just went and did something
Go watch a
silly
movie
and
or
fun.
something.
Yeah, I get it.
And what would that change with their like working relationship, right? Because it's like it's kind of hard to just constantly be pissed off at somebody if you have fun with them every once in a while.
Mhm.
And then you their family, and how that would like change maybe the dynamic of a disagreement. Because I think one of the things that and I don't know if you're familiar with the Gottman Institute, but they do a lot of stuff about like marriage and family stuff, and one of the things that they talk about is like the 4 horsemen of divorce, and that there's like criticism, and there's I can't remember, but the one that comes to my mind is contempt, right? And when we have contempt for somebody, it's really hard to move forward with any sort of conflict, because then the conflict escalates to a point where you stop seeing a person as a person, but as like this enemy to be defeated. And when you show contempt, you're not being very generous.
No.
Because I mean, I think that at least when it comes to politics, I think that I think both sides generally have a value of making, to care for the country.
Yeah.
If I was going to be generous, right? There's both this value of we want to do what's best for America, but our solutions to that might be very, very different. And
so if you can have contempt for somebody, they no longer have much value to you.
Yeah.
And you really, I mean, that's one of the essences of contempt. I don't even think of you as valuable. That's when you become a deplorable or trash or something. And so I've forgotten why I should actually care about you if I have contempt for you. One of the things, again, from political science that they noticed in the 80s, starting in the 80s in particular, but more and more since then, is representatives and senators from far away from DC found it easier and easier to get back home. And there would be more that would just sort of commute, and they wouldn't bring their families with them to DC. But when they had brought their families with them to DC, their family members, their wives or husbands, and sometimes even their children, they would build connections. And there was more opportunity to invite people over for dinner or to do other things together. And so there were more relationships built on a social level, on common interests outside of politics and things like that. Maybe their kids are going to the same school, that kind of thing. And that has dried up considerably. There's much, much less social contact across party lines, or actually at all, but particularly across party lines, than there used to be. And so that's one of the reasons to account for the growing polarization of the parties. You'd still have caucuses and meetings and stuff with your party members with whom you're generally agreeing, I guess, but much less contact outside the actual floor of the Senate or the committee room with members of the opposite party. And this has definitely, in my view, had an effect in their ability to work because they don't know who they can actually trust, who's a trustworthy person in person. They don't know the people on the other side, except for by their public pronouncements. Yeah. So that's another reason I think that well, churches themselves should be a place where people can connect across lines. All these things we've been saying, and we're all aware of the split in the yearly meeting 7 years ago, which was one of the reasons it was so heartbreaking. Is we had lots of those strengths
Mm-hmm.
that we've talked about, the interpersonal connections. People liked each other across the lines. They did things with each other across the lines. But once those issues started to boil, some of those connections didn't hold,
Yeah.
and people practiced the kind of invective and other things we've seen in other places. I go to North Valley Friends now, which left the yearly meeting but hasn't joined any other yearly meeting, so it's just an independent meeting now. And they still hurt about it, and you would think they might hurt less because they were less polarized than other groups, but they just mourn the lost relationships. So one of the things I would like to work on, and I just haven't found my way clear to do so, is specifically within the Quaker community, especially here in Newberg, where I have a lot of access, to see what could be done to try to rebuild connections. I was one of the clerks at Newberg Friends Church towards the end. At the end, we had 3 clerks trying to hold things together in the
Oh,
last
wow.
week. Mark Ankeny and Phil Smith and myself. And one of we couldn't manage to keep it together, but we did get the 2 sides, the 2 main sides there, to agree to come to a final agreement, and in the final agreement to say they did not believe that God was finished with their relationship yet, with their common life together, and they looked forward to a day when that could be developed. I'm not quoting it correctly, but that's exactly
Sure.
what I think it said. But as far as I can tell, there's been very little or nothing done to make that happen in 7 years. So one of those clerks, I feel a little bit of responsibility, I guess. So I raised it with different people at different times, but haven't found a way yet to push it forward. And I kind of like to do that this year at some point. So
Well, wow. I didn't know that you were, well, one, I don't know if I've ever heard, I'm sure that's an extreme situation, but 3 clerks at one church. But
the church had run through 2 clerks in pretty rapid fashion.
yeah, I can imagine
And
so.
the one before us, I think it was Howard Macy. I might not be remembering that right. Had good connections on both sides, and I think he thought that he might be able to hold together, but he had people turn on him and say things about him, and yeah, so it became unbearable for him.
Yeah.
The reason we had 3 is I guess they could pick off one of us at a time.
There'd still be people
Yeah.
left. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know really anything about you prior to them mentioning you in the Civility Project when Robin Baker mentioned that. But I for sure didn't know that you were at Newberg Friends during that time and a part of the group trying to navigate that whole situation. So
it turned out Phil stayed with Newberg Friends. Mark
yeah.
went to Wayside Friends, the main group that split off.
Yeah.
One of the ones that just felt our church had disappeared out from under my feet. And Melanie had always been interested in going to North Valley. It's more like one of her Mennonite churches she grew up in. She says,
Sure.
the most Mennonite church we know of in the Quaker group.
Yeah.
So we ended up there. Yeah.
Well, to me, that for sure, I mean, just like paints a little bit more of your backstory and credibility in your work with civility and peacemaking, like navigating that situation. I can only imagine
You read it
the
generously since we didn't keep it together. But yeah,
well,
thank you.
but still, I mean, the fact that you even wanted to try,
Mm.
I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't have wanted to do that. And so, yeah,
Mm.
trying to be one of the people that's working together and navigating that, that's the kind of attitude that I think is needed in civility work. So,
Well, it helped that it was Mark and Phil, people I've known since we were college students in the
sure.
7. Phil's probably my closest friend. So that was a fun trio to work with.
Hmm.
So,
Well,
So-
we want,
yeah.
oh, do you have anything, Austin?
I was gonna just kind of like wrap it up with one more
Yeah,
question because we're
do it.
running out of time here. But just I know that we've been kind of talking about the practical aspects of this stuff of just like how do we have, more productive civil discourse and maybe conflict resolution. But I mean, I know as friends, a core value and this kind of a spiritual practice is peacemaking.
Yeah.
But I have found that I and as a pastor is like, well, then how do I translate in that into like practical how-tos for people, right?
Yeah.
Because like that sounds really nice, but then when you like get in the thick of it, like what are like the little practical steps? Because there's like a ton of them uh, that we could start to kind of do this to kind of turn down the temperature or just have more productive conversations, or even when to know like when's the time to like maybe break up but not cancel each other.
Hmm.
So what would be maybe some tips, as like especially since you like didn't work with like mediation and all that sort of stuff, to get away from to kind of like to scale down the disagreements and come to resolutions? What are maybe some practical like peacemaking tips from your experience?
Sure. So I have several different of these lists. I'm going to share you one that came up with most recently, and it starts with seeing disagreement as a gift and us as stewards of that gift, so that we take seriously these disagreements. God designed us to disagree. I come back to that. The fact that we disagree is not a problem. It's a feature. It's not a bug. And how we handle it is the issue. So if we can see the disagreement as an opportunity or a gift, I think they're part of God's providence. In order to be ready to deal with that, as I mentioned already, it's important to build relationships beyond your bubble. Even if it's just that you go listen to somebody sometime, or read something that somebody wrote with a mind to try to understand where they're coming from, and trying to understand whether there's things in there that they have seen and know that maybe you ought to consider, even though they're not likely to change your view to their views. But build relationships, get outside your bubble, debubble yourself, I guess I'd say. And then third is to remember there are no orcs. This is I told this to somebody the other day, and he said, "What's an orc?" So he hadn't read his Tolkien, I guess. There are no unredeemable people. And there is that a God in everybody. This is a Quaker version of the same thing. That God is at work in everybody, and you can hear from God from anybody. You just have to be listening. Even the person who's really clearly in the wrong about something may have something that from God to tell you. So find out why the people are acting the way they are, because they're not orcs. They go to bed thinking they're trying to be good people. How would a person trying to be a good person think this way? What would be the reasons? And try to understand those reasons. So in order to do that, you have to listen. And this is probably, if there's one thing to do, it is to listen to the people who disagree with you till you can, I'd say listen until you can understand their point of view to their satisfaction. And I have various exercises to help people practice this, but that's the goal. I mean, it is a skill. You can work on it and practice it. So, and then once you've done that, I think the important point is to look for common ground. I still don't understand why they did the Dionysus thing. I haven't listened to them entirely. I would like to understand what it was they were trying to accomplish, and then say, okay, I understand you're trying to accomplish this. I'd like you to accomplish this. Maybe if we had done it a little differently, you'd have a better chance, or maybe I can understand something better about what you were trying to do. But let's find common ground and work from there. This last time in our school district, I guess a couple of years ago in our school district, when the opposition board was in play, they had a big fight about what kinds of things could be posted in the classroom. Some people didn't want any gay pride stuff or any Black Lives Matter stuff, and other people wanted to be able to put those up. But nobody was saying, let's make sure some kids aren't comfortable in our classroom. They would all say, no, everybody should be comfortable in our classroom. There's a common ground. And if only our school board had at that point had said, here's some common ground. Let's figure out how we can make everybody feel comfortable in our classroom. I think that could have been a constructive moment rather than a destructive one. So that's that point. The sixth one, in case you've lost count, is to show grace to your opponents. Not even if you win some kind of a battle, this isn't a time to eliminate your opponents or ignore them, which is another way of eliminating them, I guess. But the opponent should always have a say, always have a voice. And if you haven't heard from them, you should go hear from them and make sure, help them stay in the dispute, not run away. Don't chase them away if you can. Show grace towards them. And then the last is do something kind for the person you disagree with the most. Go out of your way to be kind to that person. Try to understand what they need and figure out a way to give them something they need, and be open to the same gestures back. So if I had to just boil 7 down today, I think those would be the 7 things I have. And if you want me to send them to you for some reason or other, I can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, we could just put that a part of our notes for the
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that, because I know things are going to get spicy in the next few months, and and something that I really care about is and something I've noticed, and this is very perplexing to me, is this rise in canceling
Yes.
Canceling people, and specifically, like a better way would be just like estrangement. Like people
Yes.
are becoming actively estranging themselves from family members over political topics.
Yes.
Specifically, I've seen this trend, and I've been seeing this trend to be like, oh, well, that like to label people as toxic, and I've seen it in my own, not my own immediate circle, but like I have family members who have estranged themselves due to political reasons, and and having influencers kind of praising the estrangement, and it just is it's baffling to me as a Christian, and not like, and not baffling as I can understand where people are coming from, but baffling as in like I just don't think this is healthy, and people just see this as a unalloyed good. And I think that having some of these strategies to be like, how can we reconnect? How can we move closer towards a reconciliation of some kind? I think is a good practice, because I think that these practices aren't being practiced as much anymore for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Jesus calls us to love our enemies and pray for them, and I don't think you can really love someone if you're never interacting with them. I mean, sure, you can pray for someone that you never see, but yeah, in my opinion, to love someone, you have to have some kind of interaction with them. And so if
they'll let you.
if they'll let you,
If
but
they
yeah, if
yeah.
you're the one removing yourself saying, I'm not going to interact with those people anymore, then I don't know how you have an opportunity to love them. And so, yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, Ron.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
We'll let you go. Thanks for
Okay.
taking some time. Good luck with the school year and as you do this work as we enter into the political season.
Thank you. If people would like to be on, get notices of what Civility Project's doing, they can write to me at civility@georgefox.edu, and I'll put them on the mailing list. So I do a newsletter about once a month.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great.
That's great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, that was a timely conversation.
I know. I think it's good. Yeah. The one of all the things that he listed there, the one that's got me pondering what I can do and how I can do that is where he said, do something nice or
Kind.
Yeah. Do something kind for someone who disagrees with you. And so, yeah, I think that's an action item for sure that we can all take into our own lives and just think about that. And I guess I would challenge us all to think like within your own personal life. Like maybe you'll say, well, I disagree with, and you'll list like a nebulous group like Republicans or Democrats, or you may even list a politician within one of those groups. But I don't think you can you're probably not going to rub shoulders with Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or whatever in the next coming months. And so I would just challenge us all to pick someone who is actually in our circle that we could actually do something kind for.
And it might not even be political. It could be something totally else.
Yeah.
Like I know that there's people, like if you're a part of a church, and you could probably think of 1 or 2 people who you're like, I want to avoid these people because we have nothing in common, and try to do something kind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know for me, the one that I really liked was nobody's an orc. There are just because I love Lord of the Rings, and I probably I'm reading Lord of the Rings, and one of the things that, I mean, as much as I love it, I think one of the hard parts about the book is that like people want to like map this onto the real world, and unfortunately in any conflict there isn't any like orc, because the orcs are like this like unredeemable people that like you kind of cheer when they die. You're like, yeah.
Yeah.
But even like if you look at any sort of human conflict, there are no orcs, right? There's not some malevolent creature that is just like wholly evil.
Evil from the core.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that's so true in our current climate, is that like it reminds me of the infamous basket of deplorables
Quote.
Quote
Yeah.
of how easy it is to really just like
write people off
and think that they're like subhuman. And this goes for like any category of people, and I think this can go for like, you know, like you can be a non-Christian and think that about Christians. You can be Christians and you can think that about the LGBTQ community. You can think about, and it's very hard to try to, I think this is a challenge for all Christians, and this is to acknowledge the image of God in people, and that they are afforded a level of dignity that is God honoring.
Yeah.
Even if you like so disagree.
Yeah.
And even if you have really profound disagreements, I know that at least in my personal life, I have acquaintances and friends who have, you know, during the split, like that now are on the other side, but I haven't like cut them off. And it's just like, and I'm like, I regularly will have coffee and meet with and have coffee at the same coffee table with somebody who is, you know, on the other side. And while we both can agree that, you know, that we fundamentally disagree about, you know, the Bible and our understandings of what it means to live a Christian lifestyle, like I'm not gonna like just be like, I'm not gonna drink coffee with you, or hear about your life, right?
Well, this is good stuff, and I think I'm glad we had this episode. Like I said, I think going into it, I was maybe not going into this episode specifically, but coming into this election season, I was like, I feel like we should do something around the topic, but I just don't know what and whatever. And it was just like a light bulb moment for me when I heard about the Civility Project at yearly meeting, and I was like, I think that's the conversation that we need to have. And so I really enjoyed this. I hope everybody else really enjoyed this.
I hope you're inspired to move forward, and, you know, not saying that you can't have strong opinions, not saying that you can't like, but the other thing is that, you know, disagreements are a gift, and we need to steward that gift. That one's that's a challenge for me. I'm like, ooh, I don't like that.
So some good stuff to wrestle with in here. Other than that,
I guess we'll see you
in next month.
Yeah.
All right.
Please like and subscribe. And also I have recently discovered that not a lot of people know about the podcast in churches. So if you are, you know, a church leader in a friend's church, plug the podcast. That would help.
Listen your bulletin. If churches still do bulletins. I know it seems like a lot of them maybe do or don't, but give us a little shout out. If you have people in your church that are having hard political disagreements, maybe you could point them to this episode as a resource. All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys next month.
Once again, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to share it with others. Please rate and review the podcast so others can find it.